The debt ceiling showdown is getting spicy as Senate Republicans yesterday said they would not allow an increase without massive cuts to government spending. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Yellen said Joe Biden's threat to use a Civil War-era amendment to force a ceiling break would spark a, quote, constitutional crisis. Now, if you're just tuning in, the background here is that the U.S. government is broke. It spends like a drunken sailor with stolen credit cards and a gambling problem, and it's about to break the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling, which it's legally obligated not to break. Instead of doing the right thing and just stopping deficits, they are instead doing everything possible to frog march small government skeptics into swindling another couple trillion from the American people. Now, in the U.S., all new laws start in the House, and raising the debt ceiling requires a new law. So the House Republicans passed a new ceiling to cover the next year, but they required about $4.8 trillion in spending cuts over the next 10 years. Yesterday, enough Senate Republicans announced that they agree, and they'll only approve a ceiling raise with similarly big cuts to spending. So what happens next? Yellen says the limit could hit as early as 3 weeks, which is June 1st. At which point they would have to stop the deficit. Remember, they still collect taxes. A debt ceiling just means they can't do deficits anymore, meaning about a 22% cut in spending, $1.4 trillion deficit on a $6.2 trillion budget. Now, I mentioned the other day that history suggests strongly that they will indeed keep paying interest on the existing debt, since governments always pay their investors first, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to have any more deficits in the future. The investors would not buy them. Now, politically, the American people would revolt if they cut Social Security or Medicare. So that's about $2.2 trillion out of the remaining $5.6 trillion. So that leaves $3.4 to absorb $1.4 trillion of deficit reduction. There are two ways to get there. One is a 40% across-the-board reduction on everything from foreign aid to military spending to bike paths to nowhere named after Congress things. Or they could just drop all the crap government shouldn't be doing in the first place and only keep what's actually needed. Now, 40% does sound like a lot. It certainly is to the bureaucrats grown fat on the backs of the people, making twice what we make and retiring at 42. But for perspective, Elon Musk just cut 90% of Twitter, and it seems to work better. Many have argued we should try that with the government. Also remember that a 40% across-the-board cut would simply take us back to 2004 levels of federal spending, even adjusting for inflation. So it's very doable, even if Washington claims it's the end of the world. As for Biden's constitutional crisis 14th Amendment threat, the short of it is that by elevating the debt to quasi-religious status, it would also implicitly outlaw both the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking, since inflation is a soft default. That's a conversation I would very much enjoy, so do it, Joe. Of course, now when it comes to Washington, the most likely outcome is also the most disappointing outcome. So expect lots of posturing, shell gaming, gaslighting, and unless a miracle happens, an acceleration of our nation's fiscal suicide. All right, we'll be watching. See you next time.